After nearly 12 hours of discussion, Barrie's General Committee stamped its approval on the city's 2021 budget. But certain parts of that budget are still under the microscope. As Council is set to vote on the capital and operating budget on Monday, January 25th, one area of debate is the police budget. And specifically, the Barrie Police Service budget is bumped up 2.65% over last year's budget. That's a rise which they say is attributed to a decrease in areas of provincial funding and necessary equipment upgrades. Salaries and benefits also make up over 75% of that budget. According to the police chief, any budget freeze would mean the existing capacity of the police would be further challenged. Here is Chief Kimberly Greenwood's response to council on why she says the budget couldn't be cut further this year.
I can speak to the Barrie Police Service budget, and I'll break it down into two areas. So we know we have our costs, that some are limited discretion, and then we have other parts where we have no discretion. So when we first start off, and we've already spoken that through your question, Councillor, that we are starting off with $1 million less in core funding than we have received in the past, that we know that our legislative impact for our WSIB reserve and the Next Generation 911 is $2.9 million. When we look at other areas of the budget, in regards to operational expenditures and capital expenditures, prior to even getting to the board, we had removed or excluded $1 million in that area. And when we look at our historical budget, our expense the same as we had 10 years ago. And then when we look at what I would say are our most important area, people. And when we look at our people, that represents a large portion of our budget, 95.7%. And as I previously mentioned in the presentation, we are not increasing our complement. There will be no new hires for the Barrie Police Service in 2020. And when we look at our HR strategy, we anticipated that we would have 4 sworn members and 5 civilian members added to our complement. That are the thing that will be occurring, and we're not filling all of the positions that will be vacant in 2021. And when we look at the financial impact of, we also have to look at the impact of the WSIB, and we are currently unable to deploy 13 members of our service. So when we look at the totality of it, we are currently not deploying or not currently deploying 29 people that we should be deploying to meet the needs of our community. So we did listen to the community, and our community is saying many things to us. We hear that did a budget survey, so we had consultation there, and we saw that individuals wish us to keep us at the same level of funding. There were individuals that also said that we should look for efficiencies, and we are looking for efficiencies. Last year, we commenced a systemic review of our culture and our systems to identify some areas to ensure that we were performing as we should be. We have also conducting evidence-based policing review of our calls for service that is focusing in on partnerships and the ability to divert and reduce our calls for service. And we're doing that with our partners. We're also, through the City of Barrie, we are partnering, or one of the 5 signatures for the Barrie Health Accord, where we're looking at coordinating and little investments into the determinants of health. And we're also one of the leads that is working on the community safety and well-being plan that will go to some of the concerns that have been raised in our community. And I think that we need to invest to the social and health services infrastructures prior to us a police budget. I think that immediate reductions are very simplistic. And I think we know that we've had discussions on the funding model for policing. And we've been doing this. We've had larger discussions at all levels of government. And we know that as a society that we need to adequately support social and health services, which we know have been underfunded or have seen significant cuts to their budget. And we are committed to work with the government and our community partners on meeting the safety and well-being needs of those in our community.
However, for many in Barrie, explanation doesn't quite sit right. In a year where North America saw widespread calls for reallocation of police budgets and defunding initiatives, some Barrie residents want to see parts of the Barrie Police Service budget shifted as well to address the root causes of crime. In January, the city's online budget survey results were released, and those surveys show over 6 of the respondents back a 5% reduction in police budget. Over the next 2 days, the 2021 police budget was passed by General Committee with no approved amendments. Amber Beckett is a local business owner and key member of Reimagine Public Safety Barrie, an online group. And in June 2020, she posted on Barrie's online feedback site for a 10% reduction in the police budget for 2021. That received over 1,100 upvotes. And she also spoke to City Council on the issue, stating that as the city funds the police service, other social services suffer. She calls not for a service cut to police, but for the reallocation of their budget. And here's our conversation about the Barrie Police Service and the ways that Beckett thinks that money could be used in other ways.
I was wondering to start off, introduce yourself, your pronoun, your name, and kind of where you fit.
Sure. So my name is Amber Beckett. I use she, her pronouns. And I have my business, the Hello Code, where I help people with friendliness and communication skills. And I've recently taken on a role with making change, doing anti-Black racism training throughout Simcoe County.
In the summer, you delivered a deputation to council and also got over 1,000 signatures on a form asking for a decrease in the police budget. How did that process come about? How did you get involved with that movement?
So personally, how I got involved, I have a few friends that are really active locally in politics, and were always telling me about what they were doing, or they were going to this meeting or that, or this rally or the other. And so one day I decided to go with one of them. She invited me along and I went with her, and I got hooked from there. There was me and helped figure out what was going on with all the different procedures, because it can be really confusing to people. If I hadn't had them, I definitely wouldn't have gotten involved. And so as a result of that, I started following things more closely online. And then in the summer, Keenan posted an article talking about the police funding and just how overblown it was here in Barrie. And he stated some statistics that were really shocking to me. And so I started doing research, and then it just kind of snowballed from there.
Coming through this year, that budget hasn't really changed much, and the majority of council's opinion hasn't changed on that budget. How does it feel now coming into the budget season with the budget exactly the same as it is? And as we've seen last night, the majority of council's opinion on that budget is the exact same as it has been all along. How does that feel as someone who's kind of been fighting against that?
Right. So, well, just as a small isn't the same. It's increasing year after year. It's continually on an upward trajectory. And the police have come back to council and asked for even more money on top of what their projected increase already was. So they're asking for an additional 2.65% this year on top of what was already increase over last year.
And specifically to that increase, so Mayor Lehman said that the budget must grow because Barrie's growing, the population is growing in Barrie, and he says that any limiting on the budget proposal would mean a decrease in the capacity of the police. What's your perspective on that statement?
Oh, this is a tough one because I really, really like Mayor Jeff. And he's usually pretty great with looking at the evidence and making decisions based on that. And this is one where I would like to respectfully disagree with him and say that I've looked, this is not my job, but I've looked at it because this is interesting to me. I've looked at the census data for Barrie for 2011, 2016, and we don't have it for 2021 yet, obviously. But Barrie's population between 2011 and 2016 increased by 3.9%. Okay, sounds reasonable, that's good growth. Our police budget in that same time has increased 17.3%. So the police budget's growth is grossly exceeding our rate of expansion. So looking at the difference between 2016 and 2021, if we estimate our population growth is around 5 or 10%, that's, I think, realistic estimate. And if we give the police the budget increase that they're requesting this year, their increase is about the same as it was for that last 5-year period, 17.2% increase. So to say that the police budget is in step with our population increase is just factually incorrect.
And for many people that might hear the words defund the police or be watching this movement from the outside, what does it actually mean? When you say defund the police, what does it mean to defund and what does it mean to reallocate that budget?
That's a tricky question. I think a lot of people have different answers depending on what their viewpoint is. For me, I prefer to look at it as reallocation. It's not punitive against the police for anything that they've done. My viewpoint is that we need to resource organizations within our community that are going to support the people that need it the most. So people that are suffering from mental health or are unhoused. And I think most people would agree that those are the things that are upstream of many of the calls that police are called to attend. So if we address some of those issues at the root cause and really help and support the people, instead of sending the police as a reactionary measure, then I think it's just better for everyone involved. The police can stay focused on what they're actually trained and desiring to do, and the people that need support are getting it. So I prefer to think of it as a reallocation versus defunding, because defunding sounds like we're trying to punish them for something, and that's not what this is about.
And as you said, and as Councillor Aylwin said last night, that it's reallocating to almost support the police in answering calls that they don't need to be answering, is kind of supporting auxiliary services that can help people upstream,
right,
as you said. The Barrie Police say that they've launched a systemic review of their service. The City Council has co-sponsored a anti-racism task force to kind of, as they said, address some of these issues of systemic racism in how the service operates. How confident are you in these initiatives kind of stimulating change?
You know, I'd like to say that I'm cautiously optimistic. I hope that they help. I really do. That being said, I know personally I've tried to get information from the police. When I gave my deputation in the summer, I started off with a list of questions that I had for them and invited them to use the question period following to answer some of those questions. And not a single person commented on anything that I had to say. I followed up, that whole meeting was a debacle, and they sent me an apology, and I responded by reiterating the questions that I had, and I still didn't get any answers with any sort of substance. So until they can start to be a little more transparent with the information that they're getting as a result of what they're doing, then I would be more confident. But right now, I think it's important that we also pursue these other avenues.
I just wonder, do you feel listened to by City Council or by the police?
I feel like they hear me, but they're not really listening. I feel like a lot of what happens is them paying lip service and saying that they hear what we're saying, but nothing ever comes of it. And there's no real acknowledgement of not just my concerns, but of the concerns of other citizens. You see the budget allocator tool as a classic example of that. And looking at where the city has said that they want the budget, their tax dollars to go. They said overwhelmingly that they would like to keep the same, and even more people said they wanted to decrease it. They said that they wanted more funding for the library, and they said they wanted more funding for the roads. And in general committee last night, the exact opposite of all three of those things happened. So when they're asking for our input and we're giving it to them, that's just one example, but then nothing comes of it, or they argue completely against it. It feels like they're not listening to what the public has to say, and they're letting their own personal values dictate the decisions that they make.
Yeah, and moving forward in this conversation, it appears that the current projected like 2.65% increase will pass at council based on what we saw last night. What's next, do you think, for the reallocation movement in Barrie for the police budgets?
Well, we'll have to see how things go tonight. I know they're talking about the capital budget plan, and hopefully there's some room in there to increase funding for some of the supportive services that I mentioned earlier. So we'll see what happens with that. But outside of that, I think as individuals, we have to do our piece. We have to band together as a community and support each other as best we can without waiting for the city to do what's right.
What does that look like? Like supporting each other, banding together?
So as an example, my middle brother went missing this winter, and he's got some special needs, and we were greatly concerned for him. The weather was quite cold, and we were out looking for him and couldn't find him. And it got to the point where my parents were desperate, and they wanted to use the police services to help them. And the police ended up not contributing to that search in any sort of meaningful way. But where we did get help was my other brothers and their friends sending out text messages or using social media to see if they could locate him, or even people just driving around in his cars, sharing descriptions, and really doing as a community what we can to make things happen and to get the result that we're looking for without looking for police, just as one example. So another thing that I wanted to share with you is just about the budget. So if we're looking at police budget as a percentage of the overall city budget, this is what it is for many cities across Canada. This is information that I got from an article in the Globe and Mail. And we can see that it ranges anywhere from 29.8%, which is quite substantial, almost 30%, down to only 8.4% in Quebec City and 8.7% for Toronto, 9% for Hamilton. If we think about Barrie as a city and where we fall on here, it's right about where my mouse is. So we're generally in the 19 to 20% range. And this indicates to me, being at such the high end of this spectrum, that we can do a lot better. We can find efficiencies, and we can ask our police force to do better with less, just like we've asked of so many other service providers. And you doing that will allow our budget to have a bit more flexibility to support some of the other service providers, like, mental health and affordable housing, and even increasing bylaw officers to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. They work 24/7 during the winter months. Why can't they do that all year round? That'll take a lot of the calls for noise complaints and such off of the police's plate. If you paid attention to what was happening at council last night, where Councillor Rietma put forward that we should hold them to a 1.95 increase, like was mentioned, to all service providers, there was such pushback on that. And if you really dig down into the numbers, 0.7% of the police's budget, it's, what is that, like less than 400,000, and they have no problem asking other people for similar percentage decreases. Why can't we ask that of the police?
Thank you so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation.